Welcome to Caretalk, America's home for incisive debate on healthcare, business, and politics. And this morning we have a guest who's a gift from across the pond, Dyson, who is the founder and CEO of ChallengeWorks, a recently diagnosed ALS patient who has come up with an innovative way to crowdsource solutions for this devastating disease. We're excited to have you, Tris.
Thanks. Well, it's nice to be introduced as a gift as well.
Well, we rarely get guests from across the pond, and you're recently back from Japan. So I feel it's a particularly lucky time. Can you maybe just set the stage for our listeners for kind of what ALS is and kind of what the consequences are if we don't come up with solutions?
Yeah. So ALS is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. In the US, it's often known as Lou Gehrig's disease after the baseball player who came down with it in the 1920s. And basically, what happens is your motor neurons stop working. And this means that your body shuts down. So you stop being able to walk, stop being able to use your arms, limbs, stop being able to talk, feed yourself, and ultimately you stop being able to breathe. And I think people will be familiar with Stephen Hawking. So he's perhaps the most famous person who had this disease. He was in some ways quite fortunate in that he lived a long time, many decades. But for most people, the life expectancy after diagnosis is about 3 to 5 years. It kind of varies a little bit, but it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. That's the kind of the outcome. But it's highly varied. So some people, like Stephen Hawking, can live a lot longer than that, and for some people, it's the other way around. It affects more people than you might think. So because people don't live very long, there aren't that many patients. But it affects about 1 in 300. So,
wow,
in the average cinema, that might be 1 or 2 people. Yeah, over the course of a lifetime. So it's more common than you'd think. Yeah.
And up until now, how effective have the treatments been, and what kind of treatments are available?
Yeah, I mean, there's basically no treatments. That's a slightly glib answer. I mean, there's a drug called riluzole, which is available in most countries. In the US, there's a couple of other drugs, but they don't really do very much. They might extend life by a couple of months, that kind of thing. So there's not really any effective treatment. And there's not really actually a very good way of diagnosing it either. Like it's through omission. They work out what you don't have, and then that's how they come up with the diagnosis. So nothing's really changed, in 150 years, quite honestly. It doesn't matter what country you're in, what healthcare system. Yeah, that's it really.
And Nesta, your organization ChallengeWorks is partnered with Nesta. Can you just describe Nesta, and then we'll get into ChallengeWorks and kind of how you're, I think, trying to hack this from an innovation perspective?
Yeah, so Nesta's the UK's Innovation Foundation. So it's an organisation in London with some offices in various other places as well. And it has an endowment. And its job is to understand, invest in, and support innovation for good, basically. There isn't a kind of easy equivalent in the US.
Is it the NHS funded, or is it privately funded, but through the government or not?
It's an independent organisation. It was initially set up by the UK government, but it was given its freedom, its independence. So it might be it might be like a bit like a Bloomberg Philanthropies or a Rockefeller, but with not quite that level of resource. But it's that kind of thing. Yeah.
And does Nesta focus on drug and healthcare innovations specifically, or just innovations for good, sort of broadly cast?
Nesta, no, it doesn't. Nesta's had very many different lives, and so it changes in what it focuses on. At the moment, it's very UK centric. In the past, it's been very international. It's been very technology focused, whereas now it's much more around data science, behavioral insights, these sorts of things. So it's not really, no, it's not particularly relevant for this,
So
for
like
what we're doing.
drugs and drug development. So,
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about the origin story around ChallengeWorks, your organization.
Yeah, so ChallengeWorks was set up about 12 years ago by Nesta and also by the UK government. And the idea was really we were looking across to you guys in the US, and looking at the challenge prizes that were being particularly used by people like NASA, DARPA, and also X Prize on the West Coast. Really at the turn of the century that had sort of created a number of breakthroughs. I mean, things like driverless cars basically originate from DARPA challenges. The private space flight industry was at least partly initiated through challenge prizes.
Well, and just contextually here, Tris, this was where 150 years ago, 200 years ago, wealthy families and sometimes governments would lay out a prize around technologies as things that we take for comments like the perfect clock or particular voyages. And so the prize thing sort of went out of fashion for about 100 years, as far as I can tell. And then to your point with Peter Diamandis and the X Prize, I think he was probably the first person to catalyze it. And there were others who laid out dollar prizes that caught the attention of innovators in the U.S. And it sounds like that a little bit of that buzz caught you.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of looking at all that and thinking, well, why aren't we doing this in Europe? And particularly as historically, there were lots of challenge prizes in Europe, particularly in the UK. Flight and horology and all sorts of things. And so the organization was set up to become a kind of European version of X Prize, I guess. And over the years, we've got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And now we work internationally on all sorts of, we look for areas where there's an unmet need, where if you crowd in new thinking, new technologies, new innovation, you can crack a problem. And then we create the sort of a series of incentives, some of it financial, some of it other things, to in order to come up with solutions, basically.
But do you look at every hard problem that way, or do you sort of pick some and eliminate others?
I mean, not all problem areas are appropriate for a kind of crowd model. I mean, in many cases, you might want to. I mean, if you took COVID, for example, the approach was give money to the big universities and pharmaceutical companies, and they'll come up with solutions, and that was probably the right approach. You wouldn't use a challenge prize model there, but it is appropriate when maybe the market's quite nascent. The incentives aren't quite there yet, but they will be, or where approaches are perhaps quite haven't changed very much for a number of the people are still trying the same approaches.
Where perhaps novelty is unwelcome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in those cases, prizes are quite good. And investors like them as well, because what you're doing is they might be interested in a market or a new area, but they're not sure where to put their money because it's high risk. And so what we do is we filter, basically. We award on the basis of results, and then the investors like that because then they can. It's a sounder bet.
It's a validation. I think it's fascinating because I think prizes often work really well with a big hard problem where people have stopped investing because it's a big hard problem, but seems conceptually hackable, or where it's a reasonably large size problem and people refuse to do anything, to your point earlier, than what they've done in the past. Those are particularly fertile areas where I've seen people, and these are relatively small dollars relative to this human scale of the failures here, of ALS being a great example. So, but how did you raise the money for this, Tris? You got $10 million. That's a lot of cabbage.
Yeah, well, I mean, I started with talking to governments and didn't get very far. Our government was going through a change, as was yours. So it comes from organisations all around the world, including in the United States, who've raised money through patient advocacy, and through things like marathons and stuff like that. Basically, that's basically where the money comes from. Yeah.
And you got $10 million, and what is the path to win the prize?
Well, I mean, so I say the first thing is our hypothesis is, well, we know this, right? That there was a revolution in drug discovery. It's already happening, but it's only going to get much, much bigger over the next decade, which is through the use of AI. It's one area where everybody agrees it's all good, it's all positive. And the role of AI in shortening the drug discovery process, but also improving accuracy, understanding patterns, working out what new drugs might work, and that kind of thing. It's a data problem, basically. So what we are interested in is accelerating that. And so we've pulled together the largest data set of its kind. It's a huge international data set, multiomics, genomic, clinical data, of tens of thousands of patients. And we put it all into one environment. And that's the big kind of attraction, really, I think. It includes lots of data.
And just to be clear, Tris, I mean, people have been using advanced compute and automated algorithms and neural networks. They've been hacking at this for multiple diseases in big pharma for years. But I think the two things that are different this time are the power of the models and how competitive they are, which is a really both dangerous and super interesting, with more people using the tools like OpenAI and Anthropic faster than any other product that's ever been introduced to the world. So you've got massive number of consumer and business uses. But the utility of artificial intelligence, of advanced compute using convoluted neural networks, really depends on standardized, accurate, tagged data, so that you have data to train the models. The models can't learn unless the data is very consistently clean, high quality, standardized, and effectively, for a simple word, rather than to get into details, readable in one or an associated language, so that then the models can work with those. So I think that massive database that you put together is probably pretty crucial to making the data readable for researchers. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I should say what we've done is that we've pulled together people who've already done the hard work in terms of creating those data sets, and we've pulled them into one environment. So, in the US, it includes data from the New York Genome Center, ALS Compute, which is based out of Boston, Answer ALS, which is down in, also on the East Coast. But and then lots of European data, and we sort of brought it all together. But it's a highly well harmonized and very rich data set. And I think the thing is with ALS, Well, if you think of it like this, like I mean, I think like when politicians talk about AI in drug discovery, the thing they'll always say is cancer. They'll say cancer, 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 and they'll say that because everybody has an experience with cancer, and it's obviously what everybody, so it's relatable and that kind of thing. Um, but cancer is already in many, well, there's lots of different cancers, but cancer is already kind of um, a huge amount of progress has been made in cancers. And the level of understanding and knowledge of cancers is fantastic. ALS, though, is there are no, as we were saying earlier, there's basically no treatments.
Yeah, I mean,
And the reason for
to
that,
give people context here, with all the investments in cancer, which will affect, I know, roughly 1 out of 3 women and 1 out of 4 men, the incidence is going up because the people live longer. The 5-year survival rate for cancer in the 70s was around 48 years old across all cancers, and now it's closing on 70. It's 67, 68 years old. So we've made massive success
yeah,
in cancer to treat it. While it's deeply complex, and we're still trying to create it. And there are a lot of quite terminal cancers, and it's killing people all over the place.
yeah,
The general progress towards a portfolio of solutions has been really remarkable, and
yeah,
I think effectively what you're saying, Tris, is for ALS over the same time period.
oh, well, yeah, basically nothing. Um, I mean, I think this is why it's potentially quite a big opportunity, because what has happened over the last 10, 15 years is the level of basic understanding of the biology has improved massively. And so we're no longer looking at a black box or a void. There's a kind of rich understanding. Um, there are also, I mean, there is now a promising treatment for a small subset of patients, a drug developed by a company in Boston, Biogen, called tofersen. This is for a small group of patients who have this particular gene, um, which is a complete transformation for those patients, and it shows what's possible. Um, so you've got this sort of the tide is turning, and what we're doing is then pulling together this huge data set, and we're saying to teams around the world, we'll give you access to this data and money and other things, access to investors and various other things. And your job is to identify targets, and targets are not the drugs, obviously, but it's the thing that you need to aim a drug at. And that's what the prize is focused on. And so, yeah, there'll be 20 teams. I'm going to get the numbers slightly wrong in terms of conversion to US dollars, but I think it's maybe
That's
about
okay.
$130,000, something like that. And then there'll be 10 teams, and they'll get access to data, and they'll get 9 months in
That's
advance.
enough, Tris, to get them going.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, if you're developing models that are looking at identifying targets, this is quite an exciting prospect, I think, because you get this data, you get some money, um, and if you can come up with solutions that you're going to create a huge impact, and there's a big market as well. At the end of the day,
I mean,
um,
just to contextualize the market in the U.S., 30,000 Americans today are living with this disease. 1 out of every 300 people over. I mean, that's a lot of people with a disease. I don't have to remind you is devastating.
yeah,
You've got this. I'm very excited about this prospect for catalyzing research and solutions. Do you think this will also accelerate the timeline to it's got to innovation because you've
yeah.
created a new market effectively of work at a time when the tools are getting better to actually identify those targets?
Yeah, no, I think so. I should just talk through what happens. So you get 20 teams. They have to identify targets, prioritize them. They get $130,000, and then we'll go down to 10 teams. they'll get something like $260,000. They'll need to then start to validate those potential targets, also in silico, but also in the lab. And then there'll be 5 teams. They'll get about $750,000, something like that. And if they need it, they'll get lab support and all that stuff to do the lab work, because then it moves into the lab. And then there'll be a winner with a 1.3 million, something like that, dollars, for the highest potential target. But by that point, they'll be getting lots of investment and interest and everything else.
Do you think you could, have you set a timeline for this? It's really exciting.
Yeah, it's 5 years, from end to end. We'll publish all the stuff that doesn't work. Obviously the teams hang on to their IP, but everything else we'll put out there as well. It's a bit difficult to judge. I mean, if you talk to the universities, they want longer. And if you talk to
longer, they want more money and more time.
The AI companies, they say they can do it in a couple of weeks. So we're somewhere in the middle. And I think we're expecting teams to be both private sector and academia. So it should. I think it's an exciting prospect.
It sounds really exciting at 2 levels. One, to make a dent on the devastating indignity of a disease that takes away your autonomy and independence, and for which conventional medicine and it's not like it hasn't been researched. It has not cracked the code, but the application of new tools and crowdsourcing, honestly, Tris, it also, I think, when you change incentives and take them out of conventional ways of doing business, it worked. It's worked for American innovation. It's worked UK, the Longitude Prize of 1714, and it's worked in Silicon Valley. I'm really quite excited and hopeful that we'll have the same kind of yield here. What is most exciting about doing this interview about such a hard subject is you've got a kind of a novel, optimistic, and sort of human-centered innovation set of solutions out here that'll be competing. I'm really excited for you and for everybody who's suffering from this disease.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, you mentioned the Longitude Prize of 1714, so I should say, and you know this because I think that's why you mentioned it. This is called the Longitude Prize on ALS because it's based on that heritage. But yeah, and I think you also mentioned the market. I mean, we mentioned this drug tofersen, this developed by this Boston company, remarkable drug. If you took that price point that they're using at the moment, it's not cheap, but it's not ridiculously expensive either, and you applied that to everyone in the US, your US market would be 4.8 billion on an annualized basis. So yeah, obviously internationally it'd be much, much more. So yeah, I mean, I think it's, all the incentives and all the opportunity is there, and the kind of, we can see because of things like tofersen that, the opportunity to break this is definitely there. Yeah.
That's exciting. Well, thanks for joining us, for Caretalk. And for our listeners, if you liked what you heard or you didn't, we'd love you to subscribe on your favorite service. And Tris, thanks so much for what you're doing and for giving us, inspiring us for an optimistic approach to what's been a really, really hard disease.
Thanks, John. Good to speak to you.